Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Ball. We are down one map, Attica, and now we can move on to the next one, which is Teniza. Don't get too mesmerized by the water. This arena is rife with sharp edges capable of cutting you to pieces. Avoid impalement and keep your balance. According to the Nahuatl translation of Teniza, I don't even believe this one is correct either. The translation equals to brick fist. Yeah, you can see why I kind of a bit of trepidation for that one, but oh well, I can't find any other things about Teniza anyways, so we're gonna have to go with that. Now, Teniza to me is actually my least favorite out of all of the survival maps. The 5 regular ones anyways. And the reason for that is because of a couple of reasons. One, the main gimmick of this specific survival map, like the worm was for the last one, is water. Water, of course, you can use in order to drown a couple of enemies, like, say, the mummies and the bugs. But we're going to actually learn something new about the turtles this time around that we didn't learn before. And that is the turtles can swim, they can breathe fire and breathe bomb magic, but they cannot drown. Which is kind of a nice touch, but makes the turtles the worst enemies in order to deal with in the survival maps, because you can only crush them. There's not a lot of other ways you can deal with them other than the traps. Another reason why this map is kind of a pain in the butt is because it's the only one that has pits in it. The map is surrounded by pits, which have a couple of openings, and if you fall down there, you instantly die, and you'll have to start over. None of the other survival maps have pits. I think another personal reason why I don't like the survival map is it's the one that gives me the most trouble completing properly. I usually get stuck somewhere, or of course fall down a pit. But anyway, continuing on with our wonderful discussion of the ball, last time we talked about puzzles and exploration. Relatively varied, but not really that well implemented, and the pacing kind of gets in the way of you getting into puzzles quicker. But today we're going to talk about, well, what the majority of the survival maps are going to be. And I'm stuck, nope, I'm stuck, uh-oh, that's not... There we go. That's another thing about Teniza. I seem to find just things go wrong. But anyway, let's talk about the combat in the game. The game has been classified as a bunch of other things, but a lot of people just like to lump it in with first-person shooters, FPSs, because that's kind of what it looks like. However, there is one review that I was reading that kind of coined the phrase that the ball is an FPS, but it's an FPS without the gun. Which is an interesting statement. It can be taken positively and negatively, depending on what kind of person you are. Positively, it can be taken as broadening the concept of an FPS beyond shooting people, and in this case it does. Instead of using a gun to kill these bugs and whatnot, you're rolling around a big huge ball and crushing them. That's already broadening the horizons of what you can do. However, the negatively is that, well, without the gun, and you only have the ball in order to take down enemies, so it's very limited. And the controls in this instance are... I can kind of see why people say that the controls for the ball are rather clunky, but I think that's more for the general feeling of the game. It's a giant ball, how else are you going to control it other than with, well, magnets that may work and may not work properly. It can also be very slow in order to change its momentum in order to go back to you, which means that you'll be running into mummies like this, and they might get a couple shots at you. It really depends. But the main thing about, one of the things about the combat in the game is that it doesn't feel like, it feels like the puzzles were the priority in this game, and combat was put in to spice things up. But the problem is that in terms of combat sections, they are fairly sporadic, and there are limited interactions. And in some cases, for people who were wanting a puzzle game and all of a sudden these encounters showed up, it kind of broke their flow for them. It made everything kind of more hectic than it should have been. In addition to that, there's limited encounters, they're sporadic, and there's actually not a lot of enemies in the game. A lot of encounters are either like, other than the big huge ones, I think most encounters usually only involve like 10 enemies max, and then you're done fighting. You can just keep going on explorations and completing puzzles and going through the level. I'm trying to remember which has the most amount of enemies. I think it was Oztok. Oztok 1 in specifics, because it was either Oztok 1 or Oztok 2. Either with the village, but I'm not sure. But anyway, back to the combat. As you can see here, we really only have limited ways in order to take down enemies that isn't by context. Combat relies on too many crutches in order to work, and one of them is the ball. The ball is your primary weapon. It's the only one you can kill enemies with when there's nothing else around you. If there is something else around you, it's usually something based on context. Either you throw them into fire, you're drowning them in water, you're using spikes. Like, this is, the survival maps are perfect examples of what you're able to do with a combat when it's given to you. And you swimming little jerk. But this is kind of my major irk, is because combat options are so limited, there is very few instances of personal creativeness brought by you trying to figure out how to kill enemies without using the ball. The main example I can think of, which I pointed out in my run-through of the main campaign, is in Teodal 1. There's the area that is really far away from the ball when you're going through the secret path and collecting the secrets as you go. You end up in a big huge pool of water. You get out of it, and all of a sudden the mummies are surrounding you. Instinctively, you would try to run past the enemies and try to get as close to the ball as you can. However, like, that would be your instinct, and you'd probably be expected to. But the thing is, I wanted to try and be creative. Sure, the hammer cannot kill enemies, but at least it can give some sort of assistance. Because the only thing the hammer can do in terms of enemies is specifically mummies. I don't think it does anything to the turtles, and the bugs are too short in order to be affected by the hammer. You're able to push them back with the hammer. A little ways, sometimes making them fall down, which means that you can actually make a further getaway. But the mummies run faster than you, so it doesn't really matter. But since you have a big pool of water and they drown and die in water, then you should be able to push them in with a hammer. That is what I consider to be a creative kill in terms of what you're able to do with the game. It's not what a lot of other people would consider, but it's close enough. And in terms of a positive note, with that example, it puts intelligence into encounters. And in some ways, more than others, combat can serve as another form of puzzle. Especially when the ball is removed from the equation. Okay, when the ball is removed, Teodal 1 is another example, because the second half of the level, the 3 trials, really involves something like that. And you saw for a brief instant there the second item, we also used it a couple times in Attica, but I didn't point it out, is the skull. The skull is not as good as the wonderful, well-designed cross, but what it does is gets rid of the area around you, the enemies around you in close proximity. It's pretty much an area of effect destroy item. But anyway, when the ball is removed from the equation, really you're going around the room trying to figure out, like, if an enemy is in the room trying to get at you and you don't have the ball in order to kill them, you're going around the room trying to figure out what is available in order to take it out. And that is a form of putting intelligence. You have to be quick on your feet. The negative point, though, is that it's usually very simplistic in order to figure out how to kill the enemies. Or, ways to kill the enemies are basically hand-fed to you. For instance, hey, there could be a switch in the corner and this does this, and there you have your solution. You're pretty much good to go. Apart from that one example, I really can't find another area that requires thought of using the natural environment that is not meant to be used to kill enemies. With that said, overall, there's a lack of being able to kill enemies. The ball, in terms of the ball, all you're doing is rolling over them. It's a big, huge bowling match. You're all crushing them to pieces. And it's very easy to get into a routine during encounters that do not require environmental kills. Environmental kills spice up the variety of combat, which is really needed, because otherwise you're doing something like this. However, if you are swamped, and this is for the main campaign, if you are swamped and eventually you do die, dying is a minor inconvenience. It does not break your flow too badly, because all progress is saved, so you can just get back to the section without redoing anything. And that makes flow very good. Finally, there are enemy types. One critique is that there are very few enemy types. Mummies, turtles, bugs, and the Tlaloc in the final 2 levels are the main 4 enemy types. And they're separated by a level name, so Oztok would have the mummies, turtles have Teotl, bugs, Hueca, and Tlaloc, Kahua. The only time you meet other enemies is with special boss-type enemies for specific encounters, such as the worm, the bird, and the gorilla. More enemy types could have been put in to diversify the ranks, but I feel, and I think the developers also felt, that more enemy types would have messed with the setting and feel of the game too much. It would have messed with the atmosphere, and I kind of agree with that, and I'll get more into atmosphere later on. So, they made a safe move, and, I make the call that they made a safe move with the amount of enemies they presented, because to put a positive spin on it, in terms of there's a critique in terms of limited enemies can be a good form of presentation. Eventually you will have seen the same enemies over and over, like mummies. But then all of a sudden you get a surprise of a new enemy showing up, and that is good, and those bombs should not be able to go through water. It creates a suspense that parallels the environment, and that parallel is wondering what is going to be beyond the next level. What are you going to see next? And it's that kind of mentality and that kind of patience which makes this game worthwhile. Because if you, say, got bored of the game, and it's very easy to get bored, a lot of people do get bored, you would not be able to see enemies like the gorilla in Teotl 2, or the worm in Hueca. And they're really cool enemies. In addition to that, they all, things like the gorilla, the worm, and the bird also introduce new situations that you have to deal with. The bird, you think you have to fight it, but actually it's more of a flight mechanic. It would have been cool to see how to deal with a flight, an aerial enemy though, because you don't really get a lot of that. that is pretty much all I have to say about combat. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's certainly unique, and is a step in a positive direction in terms of what they're able to do. So many mummies. And the turtles are just annoying because of they know how to sidestep really quickly. More than the mummies can, anyways. In terms of bowling, I wonder how many strikes I've gotten. Now, the combo meter on the top there, eventually you'll lose it if you stop killing enemies for long enough, but the highest combo you can get is 5. And even when you get combo 5, you only get it for about 2 seconds. It doesn't matter how many enemies you're killing at that one time, you'll lose it in 2 seconds. The bombs are also weird when you're in contact with them, because usually you're able to just hit it, but the ball has to hit it really hard for it to activate. And there we have it. Perfect. So there we have it for Teniza. If you're actually wondering what happens when you fail a survival map, you get a result screen like this, but the happy player dude, his head falls off and it's really sad. That's pretty much the opposite thing. So that'll be it for Teniza. See you next time, everyone, as we head on to the next survival map. See you next time, everyone.